I thought I was cheating, but it was a trap. I never meant to cheat. It started as harmless flirting, a distraction from the monotony of my marriage. But what I thought was an affair turned into something much darker, something I may never escape. It began when I met her at a coffee shop. Her name was Lila, beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who could make you forget your own name. She smiled at me in a way my wife hadn't in years, and before I knew it, we were exchanging numbers. At first, it was innocent. Texts, late-night conversations, the thrill of secrecy. Then came the invitations, hotel rooms, secluded dinners, places where no one would recognize us. I knew it was wrong, but the rush was intoxicating. The first time we met in a hotel, something felt off. The receptionist at the front desk avoided eye contact, sliding me the room key without a word. Inside, the room was cold, unnaturally so despite the heater being on. But Lila reassured me, whispering that everything was fine as she pulled me into her arms. That night, I had nightmares, images of dark figures standing at the foot of the bed, whispering in a language I didn't understand. I woke up drenched in sweat, but Lila was still asleep, her face serene. The nightmares continued every time I was with Lila. Shadows in the corners, whispers through the vents. Once, I swore I saw my own reflection move independently in the bathroom mirror. But I kept going back, unable to resist her pull. Then, things started happening outside the hotel. My wife, Emily, complained about strange noises at home. Objects moved on their own. She woke up with bruises she couldn't explain. My guilt was eating me alive, but I was too deep in it now. One night, Lila asked me to meet her at a remote cabin outside the city. When I arrived, she was waiting in the doorway, smiling like she had been expecting me for years. Inside, candlelight flickered over strange symbols painted on the walls. "What is this?" I asked, my stomach twisting. She stepped closer, her eyes blacker than I remembered. "You thought you were cheating," she whispered. "But I chose you." The shadows in the room moved. Not the flickering of flames, but real, solid shapes shifting around me. I turned to run, but the door was gone, just a solid wall where it had been. "You belong to me now," Lila said. I don't know how long I was in that cabin. Time didn't move the same way there. I heard Emily's voice sometimes, distant and pleading, but I could never find my way out. The shadows kept whispering, telling me things I didn't understand. Then one day I woke up back in my bed. Emily was next to me, fast asleep. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But when I looked in the mirror, something was wrong. My reflection didn't match my movements. It smiled, even when I didn't. In the corner of the room, Lila stood watching, smiling. I try to pretend things are normal. I go to work, kiss my wife, act like I never met Lila. But I see her everywhere, in the reflections of windows, in the dark corners of my home. And sometimes, I hear whispers coming from my own mouth, words I don't remember speaking. I wasn't cheating. I was chosen. And now, I belong to her. Cheated with doesn't exist. I never meant to cheat on my husband. It started with innocent flirtation, something to make me feel wanted again. But the man I met that night, he wasn't real. And now he won't let me go. I met him at a bar downtown, a dimly lit place where no one asked questions. I was 2 drinks in when he slid onto the stool beside me. He was charming, almost too perfect. Sharp cheekbones, a smile that made my skin tingle, and eyes so dark they swallowed the light. He never told me his name, and strangely, I never asked. We spent the night together in a hotel room I barely remember checking into. It was passion unlike anything I'd ever felt. But when I woke up, the sheets were cold, and he was gone. No text, no goodbye, just an eerie silence that settled in my bones. I should have felt guilty. Instead, I felt haunted. When I got home, things started to change. My husband, Mark, noticed first. "You look exhausted," he said, concern lacing his voice. I was. Night after night, I woke up gasping, heart pounding, convinced someone was in the room watching me. And then, the messages started. At first, they were simple. "Did you miss me?" I thought it was a mistake, a wrong number. But then my phone would buzz at 3:13 a.m. every night without fail. "I remember how you taste." I never left. Panic coiled in my stomach. I blocked the number. The The messages kept coming. One night, I dreamed of him. I was back in that hotel room, unable to move as he loomed over me. His mouth was too wide, his fingers too long. He leaned down and whispered, "You let me in." I woke up screaming. Mark shook me awake, his face pale. "There is someone in the room," he said. "A shadow, standing by the bed. It looked like you." I started seeing him everywhere. At the grocery store, in my rearview mirror, outside my house. But every time I looked twice, he was gone. My paranoia grew. My skin felt electric, as if unseen fingers traced along my spine. Then, I did something I never should have done. I went back to the hotel. The clerk looked at me like I was insane when I asked about the room. "Ma'am, you were alone that night. No one checked in with you." I ran. I ran so fast, I thought my lungs would burst. That night, I locked the bedroom door. I told Mark everything. He held me as I cried, whispering that we'd figure it out. But when I woke up, he was sitting up in bed, staring at me. His eyes were black, bottomless. And then he spoke. "Did you miss me?" Hunter hunted. We thought it was just another hunt. The three of us, experienced, prepared, and armed, had done this countless times. But that night, deep in the woods, we weren't the hunters. We were the prey. And by the time we realized it, it was already too late. Hunting had been a tradition in my family for generations. My father taught me how to track, how to move silently, and, most importantly, how to respect the wild. I carried those lessons with me every time I ventured into the woods. That weekend, my two best friends, Jake and Connor, and I planned a hunting trip to a remote stretch of forest we hadn't explored before. We were excited. New territory, new game. The air was crisp, the scent of pine thick in our lungs as we set up camp just before sunset. None of us knew we were being watched. The first sign that something was wrong came just after dark. Jake had gone to relieve himself when we heard it, a sharp, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. It wasn't the cry of any animal I'd ever heard before. It was deep, layered, like multiple voices overlapping. Jake returned moments later, pale and shaken. "There's something out there," he said, gripping his rifle tighter. "Something big." We laughed it off, calling him paranoid. But then, the forest went silent. Completely silent. No crickets. No rustling leaves. Not even the wind. We weren't alone. We decided to keep watch, taking shifts by the fire. Midnight came, and then 1 a.m. The unease in my gut only grew stronger. Then we saw it. A shadow, tall, unnaturally thin, just beyond the tree line. It didn't move like a normal animal. It stood there watching, and then it vanished. "Did you see that?" Connor whispered. Before we could react, the scream tore through the night. Not an animal, not a man, something in between. We grabbed our rifles, scanning the darkness. The firelight flickered against the trees, but nothing was there. Then a rustling sound behind us. We spun around, weapons raised. Nothing. Panic set in. Whatever was out, there was toying with us. And then Jake was gone. One moment, he was standing beside me. The next, he was yanked into the shadows with an inhuman force. His scream was cut short, swallowed by the night. We ran. Connor and I tore through the trees, branches whipping in our faces. We could hear something chasing us, fast, too fast for any human or animal. I risked a glance back, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't human. It wasn't a bear or a wolf or anything natural. It was tall, gaunt, its limbs too long, its mouth stretched into a grotesque, grinning shape. And worst of all, it had Jake's voice. "Help me," it whispered. Connor tripped. I turned back, reaching for him, but the creature was faster. It was on him in seconds, its clawed hands closing around his throat. His screams were brief, and then he was gone too. I didn't stop running. I made it back to the truck just as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. I drove, sped, out of those woods, never looking back. They never found Jake or Connor. The authorities said they must have gotten lost. An accident, but I know the truth. Something else was hunting that night, and it wasn't done yet, because last night outside my window, I heard it again. Jake's voice, begging me to let him in.